If you just started teaching yoga and sequencing feels a little overwhelming, then in this video, I will guide you step by step through the planning and sequencing process. One quick caveat. I am a vinyasa teacher, so this will be how I would sequence a vinyasa class, so you may just need to adjust it depending on the style that you teach. So to begin with, a mistake I first made was trying to sequence from start to finish, as if the class was a linear process, but it's not. Yoga classes are more of a journey. And I don't mean this in the woo-woo sense, I just mean energetically and physically. When students come in, they're probably preoccupied with life or work, they're cold, they're not really very present. So we have to take them through the process of getting into their bodies, getting present, warming up, building up energetically and physically, and then coming back down again to be ready for Shavasana and meditation. So I find it helpful to look at the class in three parts. We have the setting the tone or the warm-up phase, which is normally about 15 minutes in a 60-minute class. We have the core flow, which is about 30 minutes, again in a 60-minute class. And then the warm down phase, which is 15 minutes. Now I do adjust these times if I'm teaching a shorter class or a longer class, but I always stick to these segments. There is always a clear warm-up, a clear core flow, and a clear warm down. And each of these sections has an intention. So to begin with, the warm-up is really just for preparing people, for getting them into their body, giving them some time to forget about what's going on in their life so that they can be present. But it's also for focusing on moving the major muscles and joints. So we'll look at mobilizing the wrists, shoulders, spine, hips, and ankles, and the muscles that support those joints. And then in the core flow phase, this is where we're looking to move a little bit more dynamically, to work up to a peak pose if that is the intention behind the class, or just to work within a theme. In the warm down phase, we're looking at counter poses to balance the body energetically and physically, and to ready people for rest and for meditation. When it comes to deciding what you're going to be teaching, I find it helpful to begin with an intention, which could be a theme, or a focus, which might be a peak pose, for example. So you can think of your peak pose as being right at the peak of this energy curve, and then we can work back from there. So to begin with, you could start off by thinking about what preliminary poses and sequences you need to add into the sequences beforehand so that that student feels prepared. So you could start off just really simply by writing down a few notes of which poses or movements would be helpful to work towards that peak pose, or if it's a theme, which poses and sequences would be helpful to match that theme. Then for the warm down, you can also think about what counter poses do I need to help this person after that peak pose or after we've worked through that theme. So once you have an idea of what you want to include, now we'll look at how you can structure this in a class plan. So here is a class that I planned the other day, and you'll see that I write everything down in blocks. And this is just my way, but I do find it's easier to skim read. Instead of writing everything long form in one long list that's really difficult to pick anything out of, you can write things in blocks. I tend to keep the blocks within areas of focus. So for example, this first block is a seated sequence. So I've grouped all of the poses together. The following block is more dynamic movements that lead into the core flow. So I've kept that together. And one tip here, the way you write this out does not need to be understood by anybody other than you. So don't worry about it making sense to anybody other than you. Write it in whatever way you understand. And just another tip as well, when you are doing these sequence blocks, especially for sequences where it's done on the right and the left side, stick to between 3 to 5 poses per sequence. Otherwise, it just feels like a never-ending sequence for students. Their legs are going dead and they just can't wait to get out of it and move on to the other side. So as a general rule of thumb, stick to 3 to 5 poses per sequence. Just to give you an idea of how I do it, I have my warm-up sequences and I'm focusing on my intention, which is to move the major joints to gradually bring people into their body. Then in the second section within the warm-up, I'm looking to build heat in the body. This is when we start to move more dynamically. And then we get into the first few sequences within the core flow. So this is when, again, I'm building things up gradually. Nothing too crazy just now, but I'm adding in any poses that I need to help prepare people. Kind of like puzzle pieces that we're going to put together when we get to the peak posture. This is what I'm thinking about when I'm piecing together these blocks, and this is how I write it down. And if I'm going to do something on the right side and the left, I'll normally just put repeat, and I know that that means that I'll be following it up on the second side. And then I normally write the warm down in just one section, as I tend to keep this part of the class quite simple. And that is a tip for any new teachers. By this point in the class, students are tired, so you don't need to overcomplicate it. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how you can write it out. And if you are ever worried about forgetting your class sequence, just remember, you can always cue students into child's pose or downward dog, and then use that time whilst the gaze is away from you to quickly go and check your notes, compose yourself, and then get back on track with the class. And if you need any more teaching tips, then I recommend going to this video next.